Lions in the camp? More like pussycat in the ring. Anthony Yarde struggled against Lyndon Arthur, whose jab one-handedly won him the fight. This is After the Bell, Mirror Fighting's boxing show in association with Betfair.
Hey, it's the WBA heavyweight champion of the world.
Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee.
The Mirror brings you After the Bell in association with Betfair.
Hello and welcome to this week's show with me, Martin Domin, with George Groves and with Declan Taylor. Plenty to talk about once again. Before I do, I know I bang on about it every week, about subscribing, about liking the video, but it is important, and it's even more important this week because from next week, on Sunday, we'll be live to the world on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, unedited, coming to you with truly the first word on Saturday night's fights. So to make sure you don't miss it, please do subscribe to the channel. And if you listen via podcast, please also subscribe if you can. And while you're there, do leave us a rating and a review. Now, back to business. As I said, plenty to get through, 3 fights to look back on, starting with Lyndon Arthur's victory over Anthony Yarde. We'll then switch over to Texas, where Errol Spence returned against Mikey Garcia, and then go back to Friday night, where Billy Joe Saunders beat Martin Murray. And we'll finish off with a look ahead to Anthony Joshua's return against Kubrat Pulev on Saturday night. Gents, it was a great week for the jab last weekend with Joe Joyce against Daniel Dubois. Another good weekend for the jab on Saturday night with Lyndon Arthur. He narrowly but deservedly beat Anthony Yarde to retain his Commonwealth light heavyweight title. George, talk me through Lyndon Arthur. We should say, of course, he did hurt his right hand in the warm-up, so he had little choice, but to jab. He only had one hand, but we talked about it last week. It was always going to be an important shot, and it was the shot that won him the fight.
Yeah, it was. It was definitely the shot that won him the fight because he was unable to throw any other shot. So it was a close scorecard. I mean, personally, I thought, I said it online, I had Yarde edging it, not much in it. Maybe a round or so, but could have gone either way. And for me, like everyone else, Yarde's trainer Tundi comes under a lot of stick, especially from the boxing community. But really, there should have been a little bit more energy in the corner, telling him, "Look, these rounds are close. Let's have a little bit more activity from you." Obviously, he had the more variety of shots. He was landing good body shots, a couple of right hands that went over the top. But he just didn't impose himself enough on the fight and let Arthur, control it from the jab. Always touched him. Even Arthur's jab wasn't that committal that night. If he did have a sore right hand, he did let it go a couple of times, and he landed a good right hand early on in the fight. And late on in the fight, but that's how specific it was. It was like 2 that went in and landed. But a great performance for Arthur. I think he rose to the occasion as such. Yarde's been in with higher quality opposition. Took it at face value as well. In that his analysis after the fight was that it was close. He felt he won, and for me, there's no real argument about the decision. I know that one judge had Yarde by I think 5 or 6 rounds, which a lot of people were appalled by. But I suppose how you want to score that, how you want to score the shots, and have therefore score the rounds. Yarde was the more aggressive, pressed the fight, but just not enough activity. Just definitely not enough activity. But great word. To go to a technical breakdown, so you've got Yarde. Me and Declan talking about it earlier. You've got his back leg is almost behind his front leg, makes him a very difficult target to hit. He likes to hide behind the shoulder, roll off the shoulder, and let his hands go. He's got a good jab, a really good jab, but he doesn't punch off of it often. And if you're going to have that peekaboo sort of style, not peekaboo where your hands are up like this, but hidden behind the shoulder, you have to roll with the shots. You're going to have to encourage the guy in front of you to commit. And if he's not committing, then you're going to have to force the pace. So not necessarily just with your feet. You want to trap him into a corner where he's got nowhere to go. and then you have to let your hands go. And the second that you let your hands go, head defense, upper body defense after it, and go with it. But Yarde just didn't do that. Didn't get going. Didn't let his hands go. And kind of threw the fight away, in my opinion. He should have started not pulling the trigger, but he should have, because he doesn't have a problem pulling the trigger. He just doesn't engage. He should have been letting his hands go simply from 3 rounds in. Once you've settled into the fight, gauge what the guy in front of you's got, what the rhythm's going to be. Let your hands go, and he didn't, and he paid the price. He got a loss on his record.
Dick, I'm going to mention this because we should give credit where credit is due. You did flag up on Twitter the split decision in favour of Lyndon Arthur at a price of 40-1. What you didn't do was mention it on the show last week, but I'm going to let you off. It was always billed as a sort of boxer against a puncher, and we talked about Lyndon Arthur's jab last week, but it has to be as much about, as George has just said, about Yarde's tactics and battling tactics a little bit as it was about Arthur's jab.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard with the tactics because it sort of looked like there weren't any, and I'm sure that wasn't the case. I think there was 3 factors in play, and I don't know whether it was a combination of all 3, but one of them is that he seemed to struggle to close the distance. Whether he really struggled to do it, as in whether he can't do it, or whether he just didn't, I can't really make out, because then 12th round, he had no problem doing it, and it looked like he could stop Arthur even in the 12th. So it's like, why didn't you do this in the 3rd round? So that makes me wonder whether then the problem is that actually he was getting hit by that sharp jab constantly. So that made him think twice about closing the distance. And then also the 3rd factor, I think, is the corner, the advice and the instructions from the corner, because what you should have is a coach in there going, you're leaving this on the table, mate. Like, what are you doing? There's, you're missing opportunities here. You're waiting too long. You're waiting too long. And nothing's happening. And then before you know it, he's popped you with a jab. You've got to reset and start again. And then the round's over and the judges are going, what actually happened in that round? Oh, Lyndon Arthur landed 3 jabs and Yarde did nothing. Cool, round to Arthur. It's not like he absolutely schooled him, outboxed him, or anything like that. It was just marginal, particularly the first sort of half of the fight, which I thought was reasonably easy to score. Arthur just racking up rounds without really having to do anything. And it's funny because he did injure his hand. Well, so we hear he injured his hand in the warm-up, or it was some old injury and the painkiller didn't work, or whatever it was. He wasn't throwing the right hand. But actually, he didn't need to. He really didn't need to. So it was almost like, even if his hand was 100%, he was winning rounds without jab, with just the jab. The odd lead hook, not a lot. And it was like, well, he doesn't even need to throw right hand anyway. It's just a bizarre fight. And it's sort of, then you get to the end bit and you sort of like, this could be a split decision actually, because there's nothing in it. And I thought there would be nothing in it, but I didn't see it being that sort of fight. I thought it would be a close one. We've seen Yarde struggle, well, not struggle, but, he's an explosive puncher, so we hear. But he has often, it's taken him longer than you would think to get rid of certain people. And he's hammered away at people, and he bounced people up and down, and they haven't, and they kept getting up. So I wonder about the power. Could be a thing to do with what George was mentioning, that back foot being behind the left. The rotation and the power on the backhand in particular is maybe not as much as it could be for a man of his size and strength. So I just thought it would look like a distance fight to me. And as soon as you get a distance fight, particularly these days, you're just never really sure in a fight that's pretty close, and especially someone like Arthur who's not going to give anything away. So that's why the split seemed appealing to me. What I didn't expect is to get another appalling card like that. Well, to be fair, I did expect it. It's not really surprising anymore. That was a mad one. What, I'm sure we'll get onto it, what the most disappointing thing or worrying thing is Anthony Yarde's post-fight interview, because he's a really, he's a nice guy, intelligent, knows his boxing. And there was not even a glimpse of, okay, I'd messed up there, that maybe I didn't get that right or whatever. It was like, no, that was a robbery. I pushed it. I won that fight. And I wonder, hopefully, if he goes back and watches it again, that stance might soften a bit, because I think the rounds that he lost reasonably comfy. And part of me wonders whether it was great. It was a great performance from Arthur, but I think that Yarde, like George said, he threw it away. I think it was there. The fight was there for the taking, and he didn't, and he couldn't take it.
Yeah, I couldn't believe he used the word robbery. It's thrown around so much anyway. But that was bizarre. But yeah, we will come on to that and his team. But George, if it should have been no surprise, surely, to Yarde that Arthur was going to jab. So if somebody's basically relying on the jab and only the jab, what do you do? What ways could Yarde have nullified that and then brought his own attacks to the table?
Yeah, so I mean, what I think I've said it already as well. So it's not a fair assessment actually if I think about it, because it's like Yarde didn't do enough. If he'd done more, then he would have won the fight. And you base that off in the last round. He let his hands go and it looked like he hurt Arthur. And if he'd done that earlier, it would have been chased. But come back to a point that was kind of said earlier. Is just that like he only needed the jab, Arthur, and that was it. And he felt like he was winning the rounds, so he didn't really do anything else. If his right hand sore, he was sparing with it, hardly threw it, but did throw it. And when he did, he had success. If he had to, if he'd been under a bit more pressure, under a bit more fire, and he had to fight differently, then it might have been a totally different fight. And Arthur might have boxed totally different and even won clearer. So we don't know. They're all hypotheticals. But it's really interesting. Like, I thought about it recently, actually. I was on a drive and my mind was wandering. And I was a pro for 10 years. I've watched an awful lot of boxing. But no one's ever actually sat down to me and said, this is how you score a fight. How do you win a round? Like, how do you win a round? Is it who lands the most amount of shots? Is it who lands the better looking shots? Is it the guy who presses the fight? Is it the guy who lands one big power shot, even though he didn't land anything else the entire round? And it's kind of like, I don't know. Is there an answer? Is there a book out there that says
so we've got,
how you win a round?
We've got the parameters you've got, and it's effective aggression, defense, ring generalship, and shots. Effective.
But what's the most important thing?
This is the problem, is that they are then open to interpretation. I remember reading they did a seminar thing with the top refs in America, and basically they had boiled it down actually into scoring shots. So forget all of those parameters. When you really think about it, all of them come down to scoring shots. So if someone, say Anthony Yarde was the one who got the most scoring shots off, that means that Arthur's defense wasn't that great. Maybe Yarde's ring generalship was better because he's the one scoring the shots. The aggression was therefore effective because it's landing. So there was this idea that actually when you really think about those normal parameters, it's the scoring shots that's the thing. And this is the whole problem, isn't it? That, okay, there are parameters, but it is subjective because, there were a couple of rounds where they both didn't do anything, but probably both landed maybe 3 jabs each during the round. And one of Arthur's made Yarde's head go back like that. So then people go, okay, that'll do Arthur round. But it's like, that's probably level. And then you get a thing where people go, well, you shouldn't score level rounds. It's like, well, nothing's happened. So in the course of a fight, if you just keep giving marginal rounds to someone because they've done something at some point that you vaguely remember, then you get these weird cards. But I know what you mean. That's the whole problem. That's the whole problem with it. And like with you, so if you're watching it, what do you rate better? Like Yarde said in his interview, he was like, I was pressing the fight. And it's like, I mean, if you watch the fight, he's the one sort of moving, creeping forward, trying to land something. But if he's not landing anything and getting a jab back, is that really forcing the fight? Who do you score?
It's definitely, you're right. It's like if that's what you're going off, then that, like the things that the referees have come together is, again, how do you score a fight? How do you score a fight? Because if Yarde genuinely thinks that all he's got to do is step forward to win a round, then he's fully entitled to give his interview at the end of the fight and go, how have I lost this fight? I pressed the fight. If his corner think the same, when his corner have told him, just keep applying the pressure. But that's such a vague sentence to give to a fighter. It's like, how do you need to land some shots? Like, ultimately it's landing shots. And is it landing shots or landing shots that knock the guy's head back? Are you going to score body shots? Are you I mean, I don't know. It was something that came to me recently, and I was thinking, have I missed something here? Was there an introduction to the start of this is exactly how you win a fight?
That's the problem for you, though, George. You knocked everyone out, though, didn't you? So you didn't have to worry about it.
I wish, but yeah, I found that really interesting, and that's probably there's a reason why it's like this. Just adds to the debate, adds to the opinion, keeps fueling the sport, keeps propelling it forward. That's probably how I edged it to Yarde, and others gave it clearly to Arthur. So it's what you after, what you appreciate, how'd you score, but yeah, sorry.
There was a point as well where Yarde's corner said he's just running. But he's not just running, is he?
This came up with the Kovalev-Ward fight, the first one in particular, where, Kovalev's the one stalking Ward the whole time, stalking him. But then Ward actually is defending well, and a lot of it's hitting gloves, and he's moving out of the way. So it's like, in those parameters, defense is just as important as effective aggression. So then if it's level, actually, because, one's going like that and one's going like that, who do you possibly score to? And that's why you always get this horrible phrase, it's what you like. And it was kind of like that yesterday, but I felt that still, on the face of it, when you watch the round, especially the first sort of half, maybe first 8 rounds of the fight, it was basically quite clear that Yarde was not effective in any way. So then how do you give him a round? So then that's difficult, isn't it? And that's why you get judges going totally different ways.
Ian John Lewis didn't just give him 1 round. He essentially gave him 9, to score him by 6. Now, I know this will be, George, you've said you had the fight in favour of Yarde, but I suspect it wasn't by 6 rounds. I think you're probably 2 either way within that sort of margin. But 6, it'll probably be overlooked in time, but it shouldn't be. You can't, these cards, if one of the other judges had gone just 1 round the other way, then it changes the whole fight.
Yeah, but you have a different winner. Straight back to the point, man. How are you going to score the fight? So, if nothing's happening in the first 4 rounds, but you're appreciating Arthur's jab because you expect Yarde to be putting it on him, and he's not. You're like, well, Yarde must be Arthur must be doing better than we thought. We'll give him that round. All of a sudden, he's 4 rounds ahead. He's only got to win 3 more rounds and survive the fight. And he's got the decision. But you might have that a bit more split. You might have that 3-1 to Yarde, because there's nothing happening. There's not a lot in it, Yarde might have caught him with he might have shown a bit more variety and not even landed the right hand, but thrown it, and it just like a cuffing shot or something. And you're like, well, it's hard to evaluate a full 3 minutes, at the end of it. I don't know how the judges do it these days, whether they're marking, they've got like a little tally system for each round, but you see the cards where they've just gone 10-9, 9-10 as they go along. And that's why you're told, like, how many fighters for decades, like, the last minute of the round, win the last minute, or the last 10 seconds. The Mexican fighters just do it all the time. They hear that clack, 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 and then just letting their hands go. And then they've only got to catch you with a few in the end of that round. And if you're a judge and you're going, absolutely nothing happened that round, but, Barrera landed three right hands at the end of the round. I've got to score him the round.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, though, because it's one of them where those rounds were there for the taking. So why wasn't someone in Yarde's corner saying, step on it, it's 30 seconds, step on it, you win this round. Just do something. And both of them would, because Arthur probably thought, right, I've won this round pretty comfy now. I'm just going to shut up shop for the last 30 seconds. Why is someone not saying to him, jump on him, try and hit him with something? And that's the problem. Then you get to the corner and he says lines in the camp. It's like, well, no, why don't you say to him, you're doing nothing in these rounds. Why don't you hit him with, why don't you just try this shot? Why his right hand's gone? There was no talk about the right hand being gone until like the 7th round or something. Mad. And that, I totally agree with you. I think there's a lot to be said for that last 30 seconds. The same thing would happen in amateur boxing. Your coach would say, there's 30 seconds left. Or even before the fight, they'd say to you, or before the bout, they'd say, keep it tight for the first minute and then turn it on for the second minute. And 9 times out of 10, as long as you don't ship anything in the first minute, you're going to win that round in a 3-round fight. So it's like, you've got 12 rounds to do something like that. And that's what I couldn't see. I didn't see the strategy. And also, the other one that sprung to mind was Frampton Quigg, where a similar thing happened. And Quigg's coach thought that they were ahead. So then there was a lack of urgency and a lack of, we need to change something. And I think that's what happened yesterday. There was no one thought in there, we got to change it. This is slipping away from us. No one can see that. And that's a worry. I think that's a concern.
But I think there are wider questions, aren't there, about Yarde's team? There were questions. I mean, obviously, while they were winning, it was all fine, but their methods have always been questioned. Saying they don't do any sparring, and there were some questions after the Kulev fight, and there would definitely be some questions after this fight. In terms of what's next, is the worry not that? I mean, you said earlier you hope that Yarde goes back and watches it and sort of reanalyzes it, but if he's got all these people still this morning or tomorrow and next week saying you were robbed, you were winning that fight, we're not changing anything, he can't possibly improve or change for the better.
Yeah, I mean, you can still sit on him and say you've been robbed. I don't think I wouldn't advise it the way, but if anything, all he just needs to take away from that is you didn't clearly win the round. You need to pick up your activity, and whether that's something in the back of his mind in terms of conditioning, if he's worried about wasting shots or gassing out, or and that's a fair thing for every fighter to have. Worrying about over expenditure, through a particular round or taking a bit longer to go. But just coming back to a simple thing as, right, I'm going to give you a shout on the, minute, 45 seconds, 30 seconds, end of the round. If nothing's happened, then put it on him. Because you might miss something. You might 30 seconds, you might go in a bit wild, miss a few shots, and, it might waste a bit of energy, but you've got a full minute, coming real soon to recover from it. And you should have the conditioning to have your heart rate back to where it should be, feeling refreshed within a minute. You've been training your whole life in these 3 minute, 1 minute rest segments, even if it takes practice. And that's where I come back to maybe sparring as well. You need to be drilling this in sparring, because yeah, sure, you can go wild, miss and get caught and end up losing the round anyway. But still, if you drill that properly and you want to be that sort of fighter, people will anticipate it. They'll know that you're going to have large lulls within a fight and you're going to come on strong at the end of the round if that's the sort of fighter you want to be. But you got to pick up your activity, man. You just got to pick up your activity. A fight will be easier if you start hurting someone from round 3. Then you hear fighters talk about, and I could have done that all night long. I could have done 100 rounds. So yes, because you're bashing the guy in front of you from pillar to post. You're throwing a lot of power shots. You should be tired, but you're not missing, and you're not getting nothing back. So it's easy. I truly think that there should have been a lot of emphasis from the corner telling him to kick on. But I think there was maybe a bit of conditioning thoughts in the back of Yarde's mind where he didn't want to get tired, especially seeing as it's public knowledge like that he emptied the tank against Kulev, and then that's a horrible feeling to be in when you're that exhausted, and you still got rounds to do in a big fight. But that was the total parallel opposite of what it was last night. I'm sure he's woke up this morning. He's not stiff. He's not tired. He's not, he ain't got DOMs or anything else. He's probably thinking, I left a lot on the table there. You use it or lose it, Michael Johnson, 400 meters. So go out and hit it hard and hang on. It doesn't matter that it's 12 rounds. You still got to do the same. It's very difficult to build into a fight. Have the first 6 rounds off and build into a fight. You need to impose yourself from the get-go. And then the fight's easier. I promise you, it's always easier when you're in full flow and you're landing big shots. It's got to be the way Yarde goes now. He's a power puncher. He wants to hurt the guys in front of him and then have an easy night's work, not be fencing with them, playing them games, and just not letting his hands go.
There have been some calls for a rematch, of course. I'm sure if it happens, I mean, I don't think anyone's particularly enthusiastic about it, but it probably is a fight that might lend itself to one. And I'm sure Lyndon, after the 2 working hands, would have no concerns about taking it again, especially if Yarde doesn't go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, it's not one of those fights where you're like, I desperately want to see that again. what I could only imagine. I found it absorbing, like I found it entertaining in a sort of way. I would expect the rematch to be far more entertaining because you would think that they just know, let's get on him early. Let's not, leave this in the judge's hands or whatever. Or maybe he just can't. He's going to struggle with that style the whole time. I thought it was going to be a bad one for him just because of the length and stuff like that and the dimensions and whatever. But yeah, I would assume, considering like Buatsi fight and stuff like that, it seemed to be hard to make because of the divide. It's an obvious one to make. And yeah, like you say, Arthur would fancy himself to be better in the rematch, and obviously Yarde would as well. I'm really interested to see what Yarde does next, because there were questions and stuff after the Kovalev fight about his preparation, his conditioning, just the tactics and everything else, because he did great in that fight. I mean, he almost won it. It was a couple of shots, big shots away from winning the world title in Russia against Kovalev, which would have obviously changed everything, but it didn't. And I mean, the lack of sparring, if that's true, everyone seemed to see it as a problem. And I just wonder if it is a problem, because it just seems like there's no plan B, there's no awareness, there's a strange lack of awareness. And it's sort of, I'd be interested to see what George said, like how we can, for us laymen, just to say exactly why sparring is so important, because it's basically just been rubbished by that side. And they've said, well, it's bad because you get hit in the head and it's a cerebral sport, so you don't want to damage your brain. But it's like, no, but you actually need to spar. But it's kind of, the proof's in the pudding for me. That's two big step-ups he's had. One really big one, and one sort of, a 50-50 fight, or even Massett, he was a big favourite anyway, and he's lost them. He's lost both fights. Like, there has to be something, there's something wrong, isn't there?
There's a valid point. There's a valid point to sparring, in over sparring, etc. But if you're going to do training, what you're doing, you're preparing for a fight. You're practicing for a real fight, and what better practice is there than sparring? Like, that's the closest you're going to get to a real fight. So if you're not going to do that practice, then you're at a severe disadvantage. Now, there are fighters out there who don't do a lot of sparring, but you have to do some sparring. There are fighters out there that I believe have got to... Chris Eubank Jr., right? I believe he's got to the highest level through sparring alone. Of course, he's a fitness fanatic. He's super, he's strong. He does all these other things, but he worked without a coach for large periods of his career. But in the build up to his career, as he's making his way through, he's sparring the guys that are further on in their careers than he is. He's sparring world champions. He's done untold rounds with me, with James DeGale, with Carl Froch, many others. And that's where he learned how to fight. That's where he became a better fighter. And
does it not also give you like for you, like when you were sparring, for instance, when you were a young guy coming up beyond a prospect, but when you were sparring someone like Carl Froch, you could go in there, have a spar, and be like, okay, this is where I am, and that's where Carl Froch is. He's a world champion. That I'm actually here now, or no, I need to work on this, or I got caught a bit. When you don't get that, surely mentally there's something missing, because he obviously, the whole thing is that everyone in the team and him as well believe he's the second coming. But actually, unless you have those rounds where you go somewhere and spar a world champion and get a hiding somewhere maybe, and you don't actually know where you are.
No, definitely, it's of course a measuring stick for where you are and where. It's highly motivational, where you're like, right, well, this guy is at the very top and I'm pushing him all the way, or, I've got some way to go. So I know what I need to work on, Sometimes you might be in there and the guy in front of you is pulling you around. Do you know what I mean? He's not giving away all the tricks he knows. As well as, there's things that you just can't practice on the pads. You can't practice what it's like being that close to another human being, getting tired up, seeing the reaction, seeing the tells that come from the guy in front of you, being able to counter off them, being able to set the traps. Pad work, I'm a massive advocate of pad work. Them fighters out there that don't do pad work either, they don't have that one-to-one time with a coach who's critiquing them and trying to improve them and, working on specific shots and defense drills on the pads. Vitally important, but sparring also is. It shouldn't be used for fitness. It should be used as a sharpening tool. That's when you're going to get problems later on in life. if you're knocking out a couple of 100 rounds of sparring every camp just to get the weight off or just to get sharp again, just to get, no, it's, get fit, drill. I would spar 2 or 3 times a week, 3 times maximum in a build up to a big fight. 9 times out of 10, because it's difficult to get sparring in, it would be twice a week, and you would build it up gradually. So if you're doing 2 8-rounders, in a week, that's only 16 rounds of sparring for a whole week. And when you work out how often you're in the gym, some guys might be sparring every day. You want to space out your sparring just in case you do get a little knock or a little black eye or sore rib or something. But you can't discount sparring. It's vital. I think all the best fighters must have sparred. Every fighter now in the modern era does sparring. They should do sparring. You might go back a generation or two and talk to like Nigel Benn, who says didn't like a lot of sparring. But you look at Nigel Benn's style, he would have gone in and just had a tear up in sparring, like he used to have a tear up in a fight. And yeah, if you're a trainer, you don't really want him having tear ups day in, day out, because they didn't know as much as we know now. But footballers, I've never done any professional football training, but you see they do drills. Like, they do so many drills, because you can't just sit in front of a pad and say, right, okay, you need to be here, here, here. You need to kick it over there. You need to practice.
They have small-sided matches every day, don't they? Because it's competitive.
It's competitive. And, yeah, that's another thing to not write off, the competitive element. Just being comfortable under fire. Like, I talk to people, I've been boxing all my life. I talk to people who say, who've never done anything. And it's the thought of getting punched in the face is bizarre to people. To me, it's like every day. What's the problem? But obviously, you take it to the extremities of being a professional boxer. It's being comfortable under fire. Like, getting your head knocked back, seeing stars in sparring, and then knowing what to do with it, knowing how to cope after. I don't advocate that for sparring. Let yourself get chinned and then go from there. But I mean, it's a no-brainer. Not literally, but it's a no-brainer for sparring. You got to spar.
Obviously, a lot of this talk will be, or a lot of the fallout will be about Anthony Yarde. But Lyndon Arthur, where does it put him, Dick, in terms of the pecking order? Maybe difficult to evaluate, but obviously it's not done him any harm.
No, it puts him right up there, because I think he's 29 as well. It's not like he's a pup. He's, he needed this fight, because there's a lot of talk about the other guys at light heavy. And I think he's clearly right up there. He's big, strong, obviously got a great jab, fearless. Like, I think he's a great addition, but I'd love to see him with any of those guys. And I said this back in September that, we were talking about Yarde Buatsi. It was like, hold on a sec, actually, if Arthur can beat Yarde, that proves to me that he's ready. I'd love to see the Buatsi fight. I'd love to see him fight Callum Johnson, for instance. I mean, these are quality fights, and it's just another guy in the mix. And it was someone who was overlooked, because it's almost like he's up in Manchester. He's clearly dangerous and, really is the sort of guy, proper who needs him club. But he's a Commonwealth champion. What was that? Some sort of WBO belt as well. So, he's in the rankings. I think I'd love to see any of those fights. I don't actually know his contractual situation, whether he's properly contracted to BT and to Frank Warren. If he's not, it's going to make it much easier for him to move around and get a Buatsi fight or something like that. Or maybe they do sort of cross the divide as they sort of keep threatening with these guys. I feel like to have an immediate rematch, I guess he would get well paid for it, but I feel like he's earned it now. He's earned it via that win to go and have another fight, go and fight someone else if the opportunity presents itself. And I think good on him, because he was overlooked for a long time. We heard about all the other light heavyweights, but that's the sort of thing, that's the sort of victory which opens doors for you. And at 29, that's what he needed.
And we talked last week about Joe Joyce's contract, and then it turned out he'd signed a new one with Frank Warren before the fight. So reading between the lines, it would probably make sense that Frank did the same thing with Lyndon Arthur. And given their recent tete-a-tete him and Hearn are not making fights anytime soon. It's the unfortunate situation, which looked to be thawing earlier in the summer.
He'll have options. Surely have options, won't he? Like, as we know, it's 40th anniversary. He's not an idiot. He'll have some options on a rematch or whatever it is. Even though Arthur's the champ, you would think if they want a rematch, they'll have a rematch. But I mean, yeah, he'll get paid well for it though. So happy days.
For sure. Coming up in part 2, we will look back at Errol Spence's victorious return against Danny Garcia. In Texas on Saturday night in front of 16,000 fans, I believe, Errol Spence returned after 14 months out and a near-death experience to beat Danny Garcia comfortably on points. I guess, Jens, the question beforehand was just what kind of Errol Spence we would see, how he was affected by the car crash and the timeout, and it turns out it was a pretty good version of Errol Spence.
Yeah, he seems like he hasn't really lost a step based on that. He has punch resistance, sweet as a nut, really. Seemed like, and good on him because he could have taken a tune-up. He said he didn't fancy one, wanted a good one, and I thought it was a really entertaining fight as well. Spent, really good chin. Spence still as well, because I was worried about that. You never really know what happens to the brain and stuff. It obviously a very serious crash, and Garcia caught him a couple of times. A little bit, I don't know, tactically, he seemed to, we talked about that left hook, especially the no-look left hook, the famous one. He didn't really throw it at all. He seemed to be wanting more, and I thought it'd be particularly effective against the southpaw, but he was looking more for a right hook a lot of the time. I don't know, it must have been Spence's positioning more than anything, but yeah, Errol Spence, arguably the best win on his record, that one, and just nudging him up that pound for pound ranking. A lot of people have him really high. For me, he's been a slow burner. I was not massively high on him, or at least I thought his record wasn't as great as many of the others up there, but that's a really good solid win, and now it seems like he's just as good as he ever was.
I know Mikey Garcia was obviously coming up some weights, but that's Mikey Garcia, Sean Porter, Danny Garcia, back to back, I'm pretty sure. And just another impressive performance, George.
Yeah, it really was. It really was. I mean, it was a quality bit of boxing to watch, from the get-go. I mean, we know they're both quality operators. Spence, I don't think, there's anything. No deteriorations from him since his last fight, since the crash. It felt like it was. I mean, the aggressive fighters. Garcia will take a shot and have to punch back. Spence, from about the mid rounds onwards, I felt was starting to just impose. He was able to impose himself a bit more. Like it was catching up with Garcia, and up until that point. I think Spence was winning the fight, but I didn't know. You wasn't sure if it was going to take that sort of turn that I felt it did. So just shows that the punches were having such an effect. But a real quality operator. I think when you got orthodox versus southpaw, Deck, sometimes it's hard to get that lead hook off when the guy's got that different sort of distance, and there's so much target for each guy coming off the backhand. But they both got, power shots, every shot in the book. Garcia will go bent arm shots, head and body. Spence is more straight shots, but yeah, I mean, it was really, really good to watch. And I think Spence definitely pushes him up the pound for pound ranking. I don't think we're all going to want the Crawford fight, but it's such a great division with huge names that are still in good nick, operating well. So it's exciting because there's so many more fights that could be done, and they're willing to fight each other. Probably definitely maybe the best name on his record now. Say Garcia, Mikey Garcia had to move up, so he had that against him. Beat Kell Brook, but after an eye injury. Come back after a loss. The Porter fight done really well. Last night box brilliantly.
We talked about the divide in the UK. Of course, there's another divide in America, and actually after the fight, Spence was asked about what's next, of course, and he said he didn't mention Terence Crawford. I'm not sure he mentioned any names. He said he wants to fight again in the summer, so we're talking 6-7 months anyway. If we assume the Crawford fight can't be made next, Pacquiao, Porter again.
I take either of them, but I've got this funny feeling there's a bit of a thawing, or maybe it's a sort of gradual movement together of the two, because they've never even mentioned Crawford on those PBC shows before, and they did, and he was there, and they putting him on the screen and stuff. We know he's got this issue with Top Rank, and we don't really know how that's going to be resolved yet. Bob Arum said some stuff about how Crawford's lost him a lot of money and things like that. So I wonder whether before too long we're actually going to see Crawford on the PBC, and then that fight gets made at the drop of a hat, because they're not getting any younger, the pair of them. Both of them keep having to sort of battle against this thing where, okay, yeah, you're beating all the other guys, but what about the guy? But yeah, Pacquiao would be great. I mean, we spoke the same about Crawford, didn't we? If it's not going to be one of those two, Pacquiao's still about, and it's still going to be a massive fight. I'm hopeful, maybe not this summer, because I feel like it'll be although saying that, they got fans in, so maybe by the summer it's sweet and they can get fans in. But I did see some quotes about a Canelo fight, Spence and Canelo, that maybe not next, but Canelo, obviously not a massive super middle or a massive middleweight. And if Spence wants to go up one, that's something that they're talking about and thinking about already. It won't be next, but it's interesting. And that Spence wouldn't say no.
I didn't hear that. I mean, can Canelo? I know you're right. He's not a big super middleweight, but would he still want to come back down all the way to 154?
Depends what the money's at. If you think you get 100,000 in that Alamo Dome,
he's got. I assume Canelo's got a lot of money already, and it's lovely earning a lot of money. But I think he's I think his light middleweight days are over. Once you go up and put on the size that he's put on, it's going to be impossible to strip that size off again. Middleweight, yeah, but I can't see him getting down to light middle. I might be wrong. But yeah,
I think it might be more of a fanciful thing because of Texas and the following that they both got there. I mean, it ain't going to happen for a while, but it's an interesting one to keep an eye on.
If we do get Crawford, and you're right, I mean, I think Crawford's contract with Top Rank is up in November anyway, so it may be that the relationship is so broken that they just come to the point and say, listen, let's just, Crawford says, I'm not going to fight unless I fight X, Y, Z, or we can't get you X, Y, Z, let's just go our separate ways. That would be possibly the quickest way to a fight. If we get it, Crawford against Spence, based on their last two performances, I guess, most recently, how do we see it going?
Go on, George.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to go against Spence. There's something, I don't know.
I've always fancied Crawford in that fight.
I thought you was going to say the draw then, Dick.
I mean, get your money on the draw, split decision either way. But I mean, to be fair, it's going to be tight. I don't see either of them getting stopped in that fight. I see a lot of wiggling around and non-action. Maybe a draw could be good, but I've always fancied Crawford, even though he's the smaller guy. I just feel he's a little bit more. He's just got a little bit more in the locker. Might be wrong. I think Spencer's the bigger puncher, but it's about trying to land. It's just such a good fight. It's just like it's almost one I've almost given up on ever seeing it, which is sad, really. But that's a sad indictment of boxing at the moment. But yeah, I would pick Crawford in that. But I think there's a long way to go.
Hopefully, nevertheless, we will see in the next, well, let's say a year to 8 months. Let's be optimistic, but you never know. Final recap for this week is from Friday night, where Billy Joe Saunders made sure it was 5 times unlucky for Martin Murray in world title fights. Saunders kept hold of his WBO super middleweight title. 2 judges gave him every round. I mean, a very predictable result, right? Unanimous decision, every round, etc., etc. So let's put that to one side. But in terms of a performance, was it a performance that we should be particularly excited about, or was Billy Joe once again just didn't quite do enough? I felt like he probably could have stopped him if he really wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can't really say much more than you've said there, because I feel like Billy Joe, I said this last week as well, I think unless he gets someone he's a bit fear and that he's worried about, then he's just going to do that all night. He's just going to coast, and he doesn't really need to take any risks. I think he likes Martin Murray as well. And I think, you know, they're both with MTK and stuff like that. I think he's not a bully. I don't think he wanted to go out there and hurt him or anything like that. He was happy to just box his way through that unscathed. And then, like we say it all the time, look ahead to a big fight. But it's just, there's nothing for me, that fight. And when we said that last week, it was exactly like Martin Murray was not powerful enough for him, really not big enough to impose himself. And in terms of boxing skill, not in the same standard as. So it was like from the off, it was like, okay, well, this is clear how this fight's going to go. Yeah, it's just like, yeah, it was one of them, wasn't it? It was one. You know, I'm not gonna rewatch it. I don't think. Don't want to see a rematch. I mean, what I would say, Martin Murray. I mean, what a great servant to the sport. Fought everyone. He fought George. Really unlucky in Argentina and elsewhere. Argentina was the big one where I thought he actually won that fight. The Stern fight, I think he probably lost or it was close, but to not win a world title after what he did there was sad. But I think he was never going to beat Billy Joe Saunders, so it wasn't like that was his last chance for me. It wasn't a big chance for him, because as long as Saunders was fit, he wasn't losing that fight. But yeah, it was okay, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, you can't say too much more. But George, at what point, you know, there is an argument, and Eddie Howe made it quite often through the week, that Billy Joe Saunders is our most naturally talented fighter, or, you know, pound for pound best fighter. But you can't say that if he's on his last three performances, and in fact his entire super middleweight resume.
Yeah, I find that bizarre. Really bizarre when people. I mean, Eddie Hearn, who has an authority, you know, as a voice that can transcend. You know, people will listen to him and think that he knows what he's on about, but most of the time, you know, there's a business agenda behind it. And I'm sitting there thinking, where do I rank Billy Joe Saunders in the British super middleweight list? And I've got him down at number 4. And then Eddie Hearn says he's pound for pound the best fighter in Britain. And I'm wondering, well, he definitely doesn't beat Callum Smith for me. I think John Ryder's recent performances put him in front of him. And I think Chris Eubank Jr., if he's up for it, beats him as well. So he's fought once or twice a year, as I said, for the last 7 years. I think the last 3 years, he's only fought once a year. Obviously, the pandemic's like, that's fine for everyone else, you know, in terms of the last year. But he blows hot and cold more often than hot. I haven't, you know, you can't roll back to his amateur achievements, and I feel like that was the last time I saw something that was something to be excited about. Friday night, he beat Martin Murray, who's a great ambassador for the sport, but even his demeanour in fight week seemed like it had changed. I saw an interview in the build up to the fight. It was a few days before, and he's sort of in his hotel room in a dressing gown, you know, long hair, a bit of a beard, and he sort of had that relaxed dad look that, you know, ain't great for fight week. And there was nothing intense about him. You know, it was almost like if you're wondering, like, maybe it's just fate that, you know, 5th time lucky, I'll go down the record book, and, you know, this could be my time. I've paid my dues. But boxing's cruel. It's not like that. You know, it's not that, you know, you deserve it. You have to go out and get it. And for me, Saunders needed to stop him and stop him well. And even if he'd stopped him well, you're like, what can we take from this fight? But actually, it just went another 12 rounds. Martin Murray, you know, I said it on the night for Sky that, you know, he has a high hands. He'll move into range. His feet are good but slow, but he doesn't pull the trigger anymore. You know, he gets into range and just doesn't pull the trigger. And it's not even that he hesitates and then throws. He just doesn't even throw, Is he waiting for that perfect shot to appear? Or is that a mental block thing? I don't know. He's been in there with the best fighters in the world. He's as I say, he's a terrific. He's got a lot of ability, but at 38 years of age, when I thought he retired, or he said he was going to retire a couple of years ago. The fight with me was billed as last chance 50-50, and that was 4.5 years ago. So yeah, Saunders. He's world champion, 2-weight world champion, but for me, still yet to show anything. I don't see where he goes from there. He doesn't set the world alight, The same with Callum Smith, I suppose, that you'd think that you had to earn a fight with Canelo because of the stature and the prestige and the profile that goes with it. But I feel like maybe Canelo's run out of. There's no one out there that fits that bill. He doesn't want to fight Golovkin again, so he's got to go through the tears. And Saunders was probably an easier fight for him, but Saunders didn't want it, so now it's Callum Smith. I don't know. It was he did everything right on the night. Southpaw stance. He landed a couple of lead uppercuts, which for me is it's a shot. It's a shot you don't want to get hit with. It's an embarrassing shot to get hit with. You shouldn't get hit with lead uppercuts. You can't really generate a lot of power with it because you bounce off the front foot. You're not getting the leverage from the weight on the back of your on the rear of your body. It's like getting nutmegged, in a five-a-side game. It's like, he's done me, and I think Mike Murray knows that. So, guy, you should know that, these two pros. So maybe that was just like a muggy shot that Saunders hit him with. That he's like, he got him with it twice. He did drop him. I thought he hurt him in the fourth, and he went down. Sort of stumbled, went to hold on, missed, went down, scored a no knockdown. But Saunders in the interview after said, that could have changed the fight if he was counted 10. But if he'd gotten the count, he would have got less time to recover. So I thought he'd sort of undone his argument there. But yeah, much like Saunders, there was periods where you wanted to see a bit more. I think he should have tried to put a bit more meat on the shots to try and stop Murray, and he didn't, and I don't really know where he goes from there. Same again that he said it'd take him a while to get into his rhythm. He hasn't been active enough. Made a few excuses in that regard, but he's been like his whole career. So maybe he needs to be on his promoter to get him another fight. In the next few months to keep him in the gym and keep him improving. I think he looked fit. He looked fitter than before. And working with Mark Tibbs, I think will be an improvement. I think Tibbs might have that way about him that a fighter like Saunders would need. A little bit more of an authority figure of keeping him in the gym, keeping him on his diet and keeping him motivated. So we'll have to see. I mean, I think the likelihood is that he will box. He could box Callum Smith if Callum Smith loses next week. He's not going to get. He might box Callum Smith and Callum Smith wins next week, but I just don't see how he's going to get a Canelo fight.
I think the WBO came out afterwards and said, it's ludicrous really. He's got 10 days to make a fight with either Canelo, who's obviously not making a fight before he even fights, or Demetrius Andrade. Or he's got to face his mandatory, who most likely will be Zach Parker, who was supposed to fight Friday, but couldn't because his opponent's cutman got COVID. So it's very difficult to see him going straight into a bit, unless he can do a deal with Andrade, which of course was almost done before at middleweight, which would then mean that Andrade wouldn't have to defend his title against Liam Williams at middleweight. Unless he can do that fight, then it may well just be Zach Parker, which I can't imagine Billy Joe Saunders will be particularly excited about either.
No, I think he's going to end up on fighting Andrade on DAZN in a Ryan Garcia, Luke Campbell sort of vibe. He'll be on DAZN over here and in America. He'll get paid. But because I'm not sure how they would do Billy Joe Saunders against Zach Parker, because it's not a pay-per-view fight and Saunders is quite expensive. I don't see that as a Saturday night fight night. I don't know if you do, unless they can save it for an undercard of Joshua or something like that, which is unlikely and a long way away and would not fulfill those WBO sort of obligations. So I expect him to fight Andre, who's a similar figure to Saunders in America, in that all the talent, bags of talent, but people just don't connect with him or have kind of lost interest because they've been waiting so long for him to have this big fight. There's some needle and some history there. I thought it was a great fight back when it was supposed to happen. Stylistically, it might not be. It would be one for the purists, put it that way. But it'd be good to get that one out of the way, and then whichever one of those can push on. I think it's a real intriguing fight, and that's what I see. I see that being a DAZN one. I think that's the only way he can get paid at the moment, because how else can he get paid the money that he wants and that he's used to?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, Deg, as well, because like I was working out what are they getting paid, like Martin Murray as well, for a free-to-air show on Sky, you know, when they've got a lot of overheads now because of the coronavirus procedures that they put in. But is this just an excuse though, so that he can fight a mandatory instead of fighting a big name again? Like, it's like, are they in cahoots with the WBO to say, like, come, you put this sort of time frame stipulation on us? They've thrown Canelo in the mix as well, as if like Canelo's, some sort of mandatory for the WBO. And then, it turns out it's an easy made, cheaper fight, against Parker that's that can fit in anywhere in the schedule. Because even if I'm Anthony Joshua, do I want to be putting that on my undercard because it's coming out of his purse? He's on a percentage of profits. He's going to want the maximum value for money in terms of his chief support that's going to go on his card. He has I don't think he has any affiliation with MTK, so it's not like they're borrowing from Pete to pay Paul and it's all under one umbrella. He's looking after his fighters. That's why he's got Lawrence Okoli on his undercard as chief support in a world title fight, which is going to be an expensive fight. But he's looking after his fighters. So, I don't know. It's a great shout from your deck that it could end up on the DAZN show. But also it could just be another mandatory that we were talking about last week.
I guess if they end up pushing, because Povetkin's not definitely said that he can definitely fight at the end of January, so maybe if they push that back a bit.
I don't
Parker's
think he can't fight. Saunders can't fight Dylan White, mate. He's too small.
Yeah, but you were holding us with Canelo and Spence. Parker's obviously fit. He's been in camp. He was basically hours away from fighting. So maybe if that fight gets pushed back to February, but otherwise, I suspect you're probably right with Andrade. That's part 2. In part 3, we'll look ahead to Anthony Joshua's return against Kubrat Pulev. Saturday night, Anthony Joshua defends his 3 heavyweight world titles against Kubrat Pulev in front of 1,000 fans. But really, there'll be a third man, and not the referee, the third man in the ring, if you like. Tyson Fury, of course, lurks the possible. We won't actually be there, Declan, I saw your face. But he lurks in the background, of course. Hopefully, if Joshua comes through, that fight will take place next year. But first things first, without meaning to be too disrespectful, there's been a lot of talk, especially around the pay-per-view, but a lot of talk that this is a comparable fight with Andy Ruiz Jr. in terms of the opponent from last year for Joshua. But for a start, very, very different styles. Ruiz was... We saw that style gave Joshua trouble. I don't see how Kubrat Pulev, at 39 years old, 3 years after they were originally supposed to fight, can really give Joshua too much trouble unless Joshua has fallen off the wagon over the last 12 months.
Yeah, I would say that's about right. It's obviously totally different to Ruiz. I think the main factor though is I don't ever see that happening to Joshua again. He clearly taken his eye off the ball and he'd underprepared, maybe not, but he didn't expect what was going to happen. But now he's seen that and he's tasted that. I don't see that happening again to him, particularly not against Kubrat Pulev. He was supposed to box 3 years ago, would have had a much better chance then. I just think style-wise, size-wise, he's absolutely perfect for Joshua. And also the talk about the Fury thing, it was the same with the Ruiz, and everyone was talking about Wilder. I don't think Joshua's overlooking Pulev. I think he will see him as a job that he needs to do. The one little caveat or, side note is that, there are no fans, and he's used to, he probably hasn't boxed in front of a crowd this small since, I don't know, since he was 20, since he was boxing in like Hungary, some tournament in Finland, or I don't know, every single one of his pro fights had massive crowd. He's used to it. So how he adjusts to that is going to be interesting, but Pulev's got to do the same. I think this is a quick job. I think this is inside 6, even earlier maybe. I just cannot see for the life of me what Pulev can do as soon as Joshua hits him with a right hand. I think I just see him going over pretty sharpish. And I don't mean any disrespect for him. I just think style-wise it's absolutely perfect for Joshua.
I suspect we'll hear a lot this week. Pulev's only lost once, and that was to Vladimir Klitschko. It was 6 years ago. It was in the 5th round. He was stopped. And since then, we talked about this earlier, Josh, he's really, if you want to pick out names, it's Derek Chisora, split decision victory over 4 years ago. Hughie Fury, Bogdan Dinu, Riddell Booker, his last few fights, he's just not at the same level.
No, I don't think so. I think he's got to that level where he's now an opponent for the big guys. He's going to box his way into a manager position like he is here, and but I agree with that. I don't really see. I see it going early-ish. I think rounds 4 to 6. I think he'll get put away. You've got Joshua now, who's come unstuck once before, taking his eye off the ball. I think there will be that. In the rematch against Ruiz, it was always safety first. Just win the fight. That's what it felt like. Don't engage with this guy. But I don't think that will be Joshua from here on in. I think he'll want to make a statement. I think it will just take him a round or two to steady Pulev up. And I think, from 4-6 is a safe bet from me that once he lands, he's going to put him away. But it might go earlier. It really might go earlier. I can't see Pulev being that elusive. I think Joshua, I don't know what he's weighing this week, but I can imagine he's going to weigh in slightly on the heavier side. Definitely heavier than the last fight. And I think the big shot's going to go and he can put him away. Can't see much more than a Joshua win.
A Joshua win is 10-1 on with Betfair, Pulev 7-1, the draw 33-1. Some round betting, I can't give you 4 to 6. I can give you 5 to 6, 9-2, 5 to 8, 15-8.
What's a bit earlier? What about 2 to 3, something like that? Got anything earlier?
I can give you 3 to 4 at 9-2.
I mean, they're not particularly attractive odds, are they? Let's be honest, and there's a reason for that. Maybe what's a split decision? No, I mean, there's a reason why they're not that attractive. Although it's always interesting, it's a bit like I was listening to another podcast with you, George, and you were saying often you wouldn't do an awful lot in the first round because you're just feeling it out and you got no reason to do that. But I feel like in this sort of a fight, Joshua might just storm out and just land something. And you know what Joshua's like? As soon as he's got someone backing up, particularly someone who's physically smaller than him, they got nowhere to go. And they just end up, even if they're not out on their back, they just end up on the ropes, taking a barrage, and it could be over like that. Or he just thinks, right, I've been out for a while, let's go and have a little move around for a few rounds and then think about stopping it, get used to there being no fans and whatever else. It's always hard to gauge. But yeah, what we're all interested in is what happens next.
Exactly. And the thing is, as much as this fight may not be anything of note, it's really worked out well. The fact that Joshua has to fight Pulev as his mandatory, Tyson Fury no longer, it would seem, going to fight Deontay Wilder. So there's actually, as far as we're aware, no reason why they can't sign on the dotted line. Well, they should do it live on Sky on Saturday night, but certainly in the days to come after that. So I could not care less how easy this fight is for Joshua as long as they do the deal with Tyson Fury. If you were Tyson Fury, George, and Sky phoned you up and says, come and be ringside, would you be there on Saturday night? I know he's just gone on holiday. I wonder if that's a little deflection. But if you were Tyson Fury, would you be there?
Yeah, why not? Keeps your profile high, keeps you relevant. His profile is high, he's relevant, but you still got to do the tasks. They're going to fight at some point, or at least they believe they're going to fight at some point. So this is another step in the right direction to making this an even bigger fight. Yeah. I mean, why not? You'll go. He'll probably. Part of him will definitely want to be there to assess. Joshua up close. I don't know when the last time he did that. So, that's if you're allowed to be, how close you're allowed to be in the arena next week. But yeah, I can see Joshua going. Even if these guys have agreed amongst each other that this fight ain't going to happen for a couple of years, they're going to drag it out. But it will have to happen, and they have to. Sell it that it's going to happen sooner rather than later. So, yeah, he's going to be there. He can't not be there. I mean, Sky are profiling Tyson like he's a Sky fighter, and yet he's been boxing on BT. Much like they developed Joshua's profile so well, and yet like by sticking him in random places, randomly hearing his name, stuff that wasn't relevant to him. They're doing it now with Fury because I think they see it as this is a fight that's going to end up on a pay-per-view channel in the UK, and Sky, it has to be on Sky, So, we're not hurting ourselves by promoting a guy who's essentially, at the moment, not signed to them, or at least I don't believe so.
What is your feeling, Jack, about whether that fight happens? I mean, it would be next for Joshua most likely, unless Fury does take a fight in, say, March. But what is your feeling in terms of it being next for both men?
I sort of get this feeling with Fury in particular that he's already thinking about an exit, and he's thinking about an exit plan. And then what you do when that's the case, you think, where am I going to get the most amount of money from for the least amount of fights? He's getting towards the end of that ESPN contract. I think the broadcasting thing is the concern, and obviously always the major hurdle these days. It's a big enough fight for them. If they really had to, they could do like a dual broadcast job. I get this feeling, this impression that it's going to happen next year. It's going to happen, providing we get fans back and we get crowds back to normal. It's based on the vaccine in that sense. Then it could be in the summer in this country. But my gut feeling would be, as sad as it is to say for a fight of this magnitude for this country, is that it will end up in Saudi or Dubai or Bahrain or whoever can stump up the biggest site fee, and it will be such a colossal amount of money that everything else doesn't matter anymore, and everyone then can shake hands because everyone wants a bit of that. So I'm confident, massively confident that they'll fight next year. It's just where. And you would assume as well they wouldn't fight in Saudi in June because it's too hot. But yeah, I would think it's going to be next for both men next year abroad.
I still remember you coming back from Saudi last time and raving about it. So
I love Saudi.
Really
as a journalist, it's amazing because the time difference is very good for deadlines. The weather's nice and you can't drink, so there's no fuzzy heads. You've got to get on with your work, and yeah, I mean, but it's sad, isn't it, that a fight of that magnitude will end up there? But I think, based on the current situation in the world, I think that's what we're going to get.
I suppose if you can, I don't know how you could, but if you guarantee if there is a second fight, that it probably...
I think there'll be three. I think they'll have 3 fights. Okay. I really do. And then they'll both walk off into the sunset, and you can imagine how rich they're going to be, and good on them.
Yeah, and I think the quicker a deal can be done as well, the more chance there is that they can make it for all the belts. I know Usyk will be on Eddie, I'm sure, on Sunday again, what's happening. But if it is going to be him and Joe Joyce, I'm not sure that fight happens anytime soon. So I think there's maybe a bit more hope now that it's for all the belts rather than having to drop the WBO. Which would be nice. I mean, I'm not fussy, but it's just nice. It's just nice, isn't it, to say they'll be undisputed champion.
I think the problem you've got is that if they don't get their hands on that WBO belt now, I think Joshua and Fury are going to be tied up for so long, for 2 years, fighting in 3 fights, that then they're never going to get their hands on that belt. It's just those two are just going to fight each other for all of them for a while. So if I was either Usyk or Joyce or whoever, I'd be getting on the WBO now. But who knows? And like you say, I really couldn't care less. I couldn't care less if there wasn't a single belt on the line. Whatever.
Excellent. Well, that is a good way to end it. We will be back next week. As I said, we'll be back on Sunday live, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. So please do subscribe to the channel. We'll look back at Joshua Pulev and hopefully ahead to Joshua Fury. And we'll also look ahead to Gennady Golovkin's return a week on Friday. And then, of course, Canelo Smith again. No, Canelo. Well, it is Canelo Smith, but Canelo Alvarez against Callum Smith on the Saturday night. What a fight to end the year. Until then, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.